protein powders, creatine, essential amino acids. I mean, these are like essentially the capsule collection of dietary supplements. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's a couple other in there like omega-3s, but those three for sure stand out as the most substantiated by science, and not just from studies that, maybe have like a mechanistic approach to understanding what it does in the body, but real functional outcomes. People take those supplements and their lives change. They can perform cognitive tests better, or they actually add 2 pounds of lean muscle, or they lose fat. Like there's true human outcome studies.
For sure. And protein's an essential nutrient. I mean, we need protein, and it can be super convenient to utilize a protein powder to hit your protein target for the day. Creatine, I mean, the research on creatine goes back decades now in terms of its safety record, its efficacy record, and then essential amino acids comprise protein. So let's dive right in, and we'll start, I guess, with essential amino acids. How do essential amino acids support muscle growth and fat loss compared to more traditional protein sources?
So I think the first thing to start with is just identifying the exact definition of what an essential amino acid is. The essential amino acids are the part of a whole food protein that your body cannot synthesize. That's what defines them as essential. But something else unique about essential amino acids is that they're also the active component of the protein. So when you eat a whole food protein, say chicken, and you digest those amino acids and you get the essential ones and they go into your blood, that is what communicates to the body to actually stimulate new protein synthesis, and thus have to have protein turnover, to break down the old proteins and to make new ones. And why that's important is because your body wants to turn over older, less functional proteins, but it needs to be sure that it has a sufficient amount of those essential amino acids. So that's what essential amino acids means. So when you're comparing, say, just different types of protein sources, this is why protein on its own is so important. When you look at something like beef compared to something like plant-based proteins, you would basically have to eat 3 times the amount of plant-based protein sources in terms of calories to get the same amount of essential amino acids as beef has. So when you just compare beef to beans, beef is 3 times as potent in terms of its total essential amino acid content relative to its calories. When you start to look at beef, though, compared to a supplement, so let's say you look at beef versus whey protein is even more concentrated. Like even in a steak, right? In a steak, about 25% of it is protein, and less than half of that protein is essential amino acids. So you're looking at like 11% of steak is the essential amino acids. Whereas when you take a whey protein powder, about 45% of the protein, so about 40% of the actual powder that you're taking is essential amino acids. So a whey protein powder is just way more concentrated than the beef is in the core active component of why you're eating it for protein turnover. Now the beef has other stuff. It has iron, all types of great minerals and micronutrients. But in terms of pure protein, that whey protein powder is much more concentrated. And then when you compare that to an essential amino acid supplement where it's entirely essential amino acids, there are no non-essential amino acids, and there's way less additional ingredients at all in it, it's about 3 times the impact of the whey protein powder for a young adult. I think a big conversation that probably doesn't get covered enough, and hopefully we'll get into today, is age, because age actually has probably the greatest impact on this. But in a young adult, someone in their 20s, those essential amino acids as a supplement will be about 3 times as effective as the whey protein in terms of stimulating protein synthesis. So why that matters for building muscle, for losing fat, is that one of the core components of building muscle is stimulating muscle protein synthesis, building more muscle protein than you are breaking down. So the more that you can stimulate it, the more thus muscle you're going to build. Now you need to combine that with resistance exercise. You're not going to build a bunch more muscle without it. You will actually replace muscle fibers solely through nutrition alone. You could, just through essential amino acid supplementation. But combining with the resistance exercise, you're going to be able to build more muscle than you could on a gram for gram basis significantly with supplementation, whether that's a whey protein powder or that's a free-form essential amino acid supplement. So just compared to food, you start to see how much impact you can get through choosing to supplement, not replace a core meal. It's not like you're going to start just drinking whey protein shakes all day or taking taking EAAs all day long. But if you're looking for, what to do in the in-between periods during snack periods, say instead of having one more piece of beef jerky or having a protein bar or something like that, these more isolated supplements can have a way greater ROI.
So you've kind of laid out like this pecking order of protein concentration or protein efficiency, or the efficiency of ingesting essential amino acids.
Yes.
So, you've got your plant protein sort of at the far end, doesn't seem to be as efficacious or efficient. Efficacious, I guess it can be if you hit the right dose of your plant protein with regards to plant protein intake. But it's not as efficient as beef, studies show. I feel like studies come out all the time showing us this. In fact, like there was one that we talked about on the podcast recently where, I don't know, something like 4 ounce, you required like 8 ounces of like a veggie protein burger to equate to the same degree of muscle protein synthesis as a 4 ounce beef patty or something like that.
Yeah, it was a recent David Church study, and it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear. And what I would say is, though, even within plant proteins, there's a pretty big difference. So when I gave the example of that 3 times, that is most typical plant proteins. If you look at something like tofu, actually, tofu is quite a bit better than basically all the other plant proteins. And that's compared to beef. Like beef is that hyper efficient source. Dairy and eggs, they're actually not quite as efficient in terms of their total food amount that you have to eat.
Do you think it has anything to do with the fact that beef is obviously a red meat and we are comprised of red meat? Like, do you think there's that sort of like like for like?
I mean, that's an interesting hypothesis. I'm not sure. I mean, what does stand out to me is that the meat itself, I mean, it could be. I mean, it's very concentrated in EAAs, right? I mean, that's the truth of it. So would we be, better equipped then to digest that more similar source? Yeah, I'm not sure. And I actually haven't looked at, the exact composition of, say, human skeletal muscle versus beef. It's an interesting question. I think that they are probably more relatively similar than I thought before.
Interesting. Okay, so moving up the hierarchy. So then you get to, and beef also has, beef has a ton of really important nutrients, as you alluded to, beyond protein. I mean, it's got zinc, it's got creatine, it's got, a tiny amount of omega-3 fatty acids if it's a grass-fed, grass-finished piece of meat. But it also has fat. So, you are kind of ingesting with your protein calories, typically a fair amount of fat calories. So it's not as efficient necessarily from a caloric standpoint as, say, as we move up the sort of hierarchy, whey protein. And whey protein is a lot more pure. You've got typically way less fat, no carbohydrates of note typically. And so you're just kind of getting more and more efficient. You're whittling away the extraneous calories and you're getting a more pure protein product with whey protein. Is that accurate?
I think it's exactly the situation.
And then even among whey proteins, there is variation, right? Maybe you can sort of unpack the difference between a whey protein isolate and a whey protein concentrate.
Yeah. So, the difference between an isolate and a concentrate is simply additional filtration. And it's all like cold water-based filtration. It's not a chemical process. But basically, you scoop the whey, you separate the whey proteins from the dairy. And it's a process that originally was, observed through making cheese. And that's what you get, a whey concentrate. And so a whey concentrate does have a bit more fat and sugar in it. So typically it tastes a little bit better than a whey isolate. A whey isolate removes that fat and virtually all of the carbs. And that's why a whey isolate is about it's like 99.9% lactose free, because that lactose is part of the carbohydrate composition. And thus the isolate is simply that much more pure protein. And thus it tends to have, even people who are lactose intolerant won't have an allergic reaction typically to an isolate, and it's that much more, again, concentrated.
Love that.
Yeah.
Would you consider, some people have asked me, occasionally I've been asked, well, you often talk about the potential harms of over-consuming ultra-processed foods, which tend to be packaged foods with shelf stability. Would you consider whey protein an ultra-processed food?
I think that's such a good question. So this is like nuance that I would have brought up at the very beginning around labels that we give things, right? So when you think about an ultra-processed food, I think the typical definition that we're thinking about is a food company trying to minimize cost maximize addictive behavior relative to consuming that food. Like that's why it's so ultra processed. Like, I mean, it's a money machine in order to make the best returns on it. And those typically, how do you make something as palatable as can possibly be? Thus, more salt, more sugar, more fat, et cetera. There's no focus on it being, nutrient dense other than calorically nutrient dense. Whereas when you think about a supplement, which a whey protein powder is and a whey protein isolate is, the goal of that product is actually to create a specific health benefit. So yes, it goes through processing. You have to remove the protein from the dairy itself. Then you have to do further cold filtration to remove even more of the fats and carbs. And thus it goes through a multi-stage processing. But at the same time, if you're going out and you're buying cheese, or you're buying, any type of fermented dairy, those are also processed foods, right? So I think it's about having more perspective than like really simple labels about something being processed or not. Like, what's the purpose? Is it to just fill me with calories and make me addicted to it? Or is it to actually get more of the core nutrients that I ultimately want, in my life to live the most, vibrant and fulfilling healthful life that I can live?
1,000%. I mean, I liken it to extra virgin olive oil, which is in a way a processed food. It's not an ultra processed food, but extra virgin olive oil is an extract of the olive fruit. And humans have been pressing olives and consuming its juice for millennia at this point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but whey protein is a byproduct of cheese making.
Yeah, it is.
Or traditionally it has been.
It has, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, so I wouldn't personally consider it an ultra processed food, but it is something that it is a question that arises sometimes. Like, if you feel a certain way about ultra processed foods or processed foods, in general, then what about whey protein gives it sort of a green flag, despite the fact that it's processed?
Yeah. And an interesting nuance also maybe between a whey protein powder and like an ultra processed food would be some type of protein bar that you might buy at like a 24-hour fitness or something like that, where yes, it has protein powders in it, and maybe it's whey and soy and like whatever's the best concoction they can create to make it taste decent for people. And then there's also all types of artificial flavors potentially, and colors and other weird food additives to make it more palatable. Now it's like, is this creating benefit for me? It's like I've added all these kind of other weird chemicals into my diet to try to get this protein versus, a very simple grass-fed whey protein isolate with organic natural flavors. Like those are not the same thing either.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a gray area. Certainly there are some protein bars that are better than others. I don't think I feel like Kion, you guys would kill a protein bar if you ever tried to iterate on one, but like nobody's currently nailing the protein bar thing. When I'm assessing a protein bar, I look at the total amount of calories, and then I look at the protein content. And a really simple back of the napkin formula that you can do pretty much in your head is you multiply the amount of protein in the bar by 10. And if the number that you derive from that equals or is greater than the amount of calories in the bar, you've got at least a bar that's 40% protein or more. To me, that's the basic standard threshold.
I like that. That's a good model.
Yeah. So for example, a 200 calorie protein bar with 20 grams of protein, you multiply the 20 by 10, and that gives you 200. So because that number matches the amount of calories in the bar, 200 to 200, that's a 40% protein bar. If the number that you get when you multiply the amount of protein grams by 10 is higher than the amount of calories in the bar, then that bar is actually higher than 40% protein. So that's like the bare minimum that I look for. So like generally a 20 gram of protein bar should have no more than 200 calories.
I think that's a great guide. I mean, interestingly, at the same time, if you chose something that's potentially less processed, like Greek yogurt, a 2% or non-fat Greek yogurt, which doesn't have to be, you get a full fat too. But let's say if you're thinking about calories per, gram of protein, you could get like, it's near 20 grams of protein for like 110 calories in a cup of Greek yogurt. So, again, though, you can't take Greek yogurt and throw it in your bag and have it in the middle of the day, right? Or have it in an emergency. So again, it's I think there's nuance to all this, like trying to make the right decisions.
Totally. Okay, so going up the sort of efficiency hierarchy, then you arrive at essential amino acids. So what are the use cases for essential amino acids that make them worth considering?
So one note I'll make before we get into the use cases is this age component, because I think that that's, again, something that really gets overlooked. The data that I shared with you earlier were specifically for young adults. So we're talking about people in their 20s. When you start to get into aging, the ability to digest the protein and the sensitivity to the amino acids in the protein to stimulate this protein turnover gets reduced. So literally for someone in their 60s, whey protein is about half as effective for stimulating protein synthesis as it was in their 20s. Like, just let that sink in. Half as effective. And the reason for that is, and so it's even greater issue when you're looking at like whole food protein sources. So when someone's 60 and they're trying to hit these higher daily protein intakes of like a gram of protein, it's not like someone who's 20 or 30 or even 40 trying to eat that gram of protein. And thus the benefits of the whey protein, while I critique that saying it's half as effective, it's still way more effective than like say steak or chicken or any of that will be. So I think the benefits of supplementation overall become greater and greater the older that you get.
This what's called sometimes referred to as anabolic resistance?
It's exactly anabolic resistance that begins around age 30 and it progressively gets worse as you get older.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, we've definitely had other experts like Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on the show, and this is a topic that often comes up when it comes to aging populations.
Yeah. So when you talk about, okay, well, what use case would essential amino acids as a free-form supplement have, relative to these other types of options? I think a great one is the on the go. Like if you just think generally, hey, I'm trying to quench hunger, but I'm really also just trying to stimulate protein synthesis one more time throughout the day to make sure that I have good energy. I'm, communicating that I want protein turnover to my skin, my hair, my nails, my muscles, etc. If you are, a general guide is about, is to use the decade that you are. And this is on the more conservative side. If you're 30 years old, basically essential amino acids, if they're leucine enriched, so like a quality essential amino acid product, is going to have about 3 times the impact as a whey protein powder. If you're 40, it's going to have about 4 times, 50, 5 times, 60, 6 times. Most of the research in the literature is in the 20s, 30s, 60s. But that's a general kind of guide to understand how it progressively gets, how EAAs provide that much more benefit as you get older. So let's say you're trying to get, 20 grams of protein in through this protein bar. You instead could just have 5 grams of essential amino acids if you're 40 years old, and it's about the equivalent.
Wow.
So that is a very easy, efficient way to get the equivalent of what that protein is that you want throughout the day, in a much easier way than, again, trying to carry a yogurt or get a whole smoothie. You just have a packet and pour it in some water or take some capsules and it'll provide that benefit. Again, it's not to replace all your protein intake throughout the day, but that's a great example. I think, though, probably the most helpful way of thinking about it is if you're really trying to hit higher daily protein intake. And when I say higher, I mean not the minimum 0.4 grams. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you're only eating 40 grams of protein per day, but you're trying to get at least 0.7, 0.8, ideally 1 grams of protein per pound of body weight, particularly if you're over 40. I think that those higher daily targets make even more and more sense. It's hard. I mean, quite frankly, it's hard. As we just described, like trying to think about the math of the protein bar or how much is in the protein shake or all these different meals, et cetera. You think about it, a few ounces of meat, 3 ounces are approximately, 20 grams of protein. To eat that much throughout the day multiple times, it can be hard.
Super.
Right? It can be super hard. And so one very easy, simple thing to do is like just start your day with essential amino acids. Like if you're someone who doesn't like to eat first thing in the morning, you take essential amino acids, 1 serving first thing in the morning, and boom, you've basically gotten the equivalent of, depending on your age, 15, 20, all the way up to 30 grams of protein first thing in the morning. And it's already helping you to hit those daily targets. And you know what? If you go ahead and you hit that 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight throughout the day, great. There's no negative impact of going to 1.1, 1.2, but you ensure as like an insurance policy that you are sustainably building and maintaining that lean muscle over time.
Whoa. So for me, I'm 42. So consuming 5 grams of essential amino acids in the morning for me would be equivalent, at least in terms of muscle protein, its capacity to stimulate muscle protein synthesis would be on par with 20 grams of protein.
20 grams of whey protein.
It's
actually be more if it was compared to beef. But yeah, compared to whey protein, it's about 20 grams.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, and it's much more efficient, concentrated form in terms of a total caloric equivalent. It's much less. So it's a great, easy way to do that.
You know what drives me crazy? Sometimes I look at, because, I just got back from Expo West, and I love to peruse the supplement aisle at like Erewhon or Whole Foods or wherever I happen to be, just to see what the latest and greatest on the market is. And it drives me nuts when I see essential amino acid supplements that don't clearly indicate the concentration of each individual amino acid. Like oftentimes you'll see proprietary blends.
It's really lame.
Yeah, it's super
lame. Yeah, it depends. I can understand, not for this product, but for other product categories, maybe someone's developed some super novel ingredient or some super novel formula. But essential amino acids are widely studied publicly by major institutions, private institutions, government like NIH, NASA, et cetera. The research is really publicly available. It's very clear what proportions you want in a formula, specifically if you're trying to stimulate, muscle protein synthesis. And there's absolutely no reason to make it proprietary.
I'm like, what are you hiding?
I know, I don't get it. Like, I think it's some kind of business marketing thing where it's like, well, if we hide it, then we can say that it's some special thing, but I think that's just disingenuous.
Yeah.
Like, if it really was a secret special thing, well, then I would maybe get it, but it's not. Like, it's research from the last 30 years that's publicly available, and you should just say what's in it. More importantly, taking the wrong proportions of amino acids can have negative impacts. I mean, a perfect example would be, if you look at a typical leucine-enriched amino acid supplement, leucine is going to be by far the highest. It's going to be about 40%. And the reason for that is and this is actually really interesting, when you look at whey protein, leucine makes up about 27% of the essential amino acids. When you increase that to the 40%, it has about like a 50% increase in the efficacy of the total essential amino acid impact. So it's like that, having that higher amount is really important. So there's a reason for that. On the very, very far end, tryptophan will be by far the lowest. 3.5 milligrams relative to like 2 grams of leucine. And maybe someone might have it up to like 10 or 20, tiny amount. If for some reason those marketers who are part of whatever that company is increasing the tryptophan considerably, there's no reason to do it. It's actually going to have, it's on the same pathway as leucine, so they compete with each other. So it's actually going to like potentially negatively, in fact, impact it. It's also going to increase production of serotonin likely. So it has this like totally opposite impact. And it makes no sense to hide it, and the risk of getting proportions that are actually negative for you are just too great to risk it in my mind.
Totally. I mean, if you're buying like a multivitamin and it clearly lays out the vitamins and minerals and the doses or whatever, and then on the side there's like a proprietary blend, we'll just say it's like an adaptogen blend, or maybe there's some plant polyphenols or whatever in there, and this like little proprietary, but you're spending the money with the intent of buying a multivitamin, and that's clearly laid out for you, then that's fine. But if your intent is to buy an essential amino acid product and the entire array of amino acids are hidden behind a proprietary blend, then to me you should put that product down.
Totally. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, even in like typical bodybuilding circles and like old school protein, it lists the exact amount of each essential amino acid that's even in the protein powder. Like that's the tradition, is to be very explicit and to share with people exactly what's in it.
1,000%. Like, would you ever buy a multivitamin where the vitamins and minerals were hidden behind a proprietary blend?
Yeah. I mean, again, like the risk of honestly consuming a vitamin C, it's not going to be that harmful if you consume too much. You consume too much vitamin D repeatedly over and over and over again, and it's an oil-based supplement. Like, there's actually real risk to that. Like, of course you wouldn't.
Crazy. Okay, so we've established that essential amino acids are more effective for older adults than for young people?
Yeah, they're about twice as effective.
Wow.
Yeah, so if you think about it, say for... if you're in your 20s, it's about three times the impact of whey protein, whereas if in your 60s, it's 6 times the impact. So every decade, it gets that much more and more impactful.
Now, when it comes to taking them, I'm assuming that timing ultimately doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's about hitting your protein target for the day, or your essential amino acid target for the day.
This is another great, I think, age-related question. The younger you are, the less it matters. The older you are, the more it matters. And the reason for that, again, is anabolic resistance. So when we're younger, and actually the same thing is true for plant proteins versus like animal-based proteins. When they look at comparison studies for like 20-year-olds eating, beef or plant-based proteins, there's less of a difference than as you get older, there's more and more of a difference. So really what I would say is general guidance is it's really about hitting the essential amino acids daily in your diet. But as you get older, protein timing can have a greater impact. If you were to divide up your total daily protein intake into 6 smaller servings of protein or 6 smaller servings of essential amino acids, you would get a greater impact than you would if you took it all at once for dinner. If you're 20, it's less of a difference. So I think it's really, again, like I'm around your age, I'm 41. It's like for us, I think it matters. It matters to try to eat probably a few meals per day versus only eating 1 meal a day with all your protein, but it's not as important for, as people in their 60s. At that age, I would definitely recommend trying to have more smaller doses throughout the day. And that's simply because each time you consume that protein, particularly if you consume the protein on its own, you will get a better increase in the EAA plasma levels. Meaning when you digest the protein, the EAAs go into your blood, it creates a spike and it communicates to the body, hey, we have enough of this stuff to where we can start breaking down the old proteins and replace them with the new ones. So yeah, I mean, like the younger you are, the less important is, the older you are, the more important. And so I think it's the same thing with EAAs. It's like if you take it with a meal, like if you're already eating protein, I mean, here's an interesting case. If you actually took a 20-gram scoop, and for us, for an adult male about our size, if you had a 20-gram scoop of whey protein and at the same time you took, a 5-gram scoop of EAAs, you would more than double the impact of that protein. You'd get more impact than if you took 2 scoops of protein. So there's actually a whole use case to just taking EAAs with other sources of protein. You could eat it with lunch if you have salad and chicken, or you could have it with dinner. You could have it with a whey protein shake, or you could just take it totally on its own and it's going to have impact. So I think there's a good reason to take it with meals, potentially, specifically if it's not like a super protein rich meal, because you're going to maximize the impact of the protein that's already there. Which there's basically latent opportunity in the protein, like in that chicken that's on your salad. It's going to stimulate some protein synthesis, but because you're eating it with salad and all these other things and it's being digested, it's just not as potent. Whereas if you take it with essential amino acids, you're actually going to get more out of those building blocks, because the essential amino acids themselves are going to stimulate all the protein synthesis, and then it's going to utilize the essential and the non-essential amino acids that are in the chicken. So I think there's a great case to consume it with food. There's great cases to consume it first thing in the morning, as I said. There's really not like a bad time to use it. I would just say, like, if you're eating a super protein rich meal, it's probably like less, like you're eating with like your steak at night and you're 40 years old, it's probably less beneficial. But if you're 60, it might actually be beneficial. You might actually get more benefit out of that steak than you would have otherwise.
Now, essential amino acids, I feel like they're not quite as talked about as creatine and protein powders, but there was nonetheless I believe it was a couple of months ago, last time, around the time that you came in here last, there was it was like a position stand from one of the big major like sports academies or
the international
agencies.
The International Society of Sports Nutrition, which is actually it's an academic group of all the leading researchers of sports nutrition. So the people that actually do all these studies on protein, creatine, amino acids, HMB, everything, they study all this stuff. They then come together to review all the literature and basically do like a meta-analysis. And thus it supports the whole organization of up and coming academics and kind of holds everyone accountable, et cetera. So yeah, there was a big one on essential amino acids I think it was about a year and a half ago. And actually some updates to their creatine one came out like last year. There's a lot of really good literature that comes out of that group. So I highly recommend it.
Super interesting. Yeah, let's talk about creatine a little bit. I'm a huge fan of creatine. I think it's a supplement that pretty much everybody should be on. I mean, unless you have like a medical condition that specifically contraindicates its use. But there seems to be a ton of data coming out now about not just benefits for physical performance, body composition, but also cognitive health and mental health. It's a super fascinating time for creatine. You want to maybe unpack some of that literature for us?
Yeah, so creatine has been around a long time as a supplement, and it's been studied basically more than anything else. Like the only things that come close to it are like whey protein powder and essential amino acids. The core mechanisms of action, like how creatine works, I think is helpful to understand because that helps back up our understanding of why it would help with muscle, but then potentially why it would help with things like cognition. So creatine is basically an alternative energy source. People are typically familiar with aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. It's like when you exercise, whether you're using oxygen, how hard you're running, basically, right? Well, there's this third energy system called the phosphocreatine energy system. And what that is when our body actually makes some creatine, but we also can get it from fish and meat. That's fish and red meat. That's primarily where you get it from. And there's a small amount you make inside your body. And then that creatine gets stored inside of our muscle cells as these phosphocreatine stores. And what those phosphocreatine stores do is when it's time to create a burst of energy. So it's like I'm doing pull-ups, or it could also be with cardio type stuff like sprinting, but basically really intense short bursts of energy. Rather than trying to convert energy via the aerobic or the anaerobic energy system, it quickly converts that phosphocreatine into ATP. And thus, the benefits typically that have been studied with creatine are these people who like to lift weights take creatine, they take it consistently, it gets built up in their cells and their muscle, and when they go to lift weights, and I used to be able to do 8 reps of this certain exercise, suddenly I can do 10. And it's because you actually have more of this raw energy stored in the muscles. Now, if you take that consistently and you continue to lift weights or you continue to sprint, you're going to get better. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get faster, etc. So basically in the short term, it actually just gives you this kind of burst of energy to perform exercise. In the long term, the functional outcomes are that you build more lean muscle. You get stronger, you get quicker, etc. And that has hundreds of studies. Like that's a pretty hard one to debate.
Want to hear a fun fact? I wrote my high school senior thesis on creatine monohydrate.
I love that.
That's how long I've been in this game.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't know how rigorous my research was at the time, but whatever sources I had available to me, I was able to cobble together this. It was like an 11-page paper, which at the time was like an insurmountable amount of content to put to page. But
and you were just like a gym nerd guy, or like
I was,
yeah, cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
I was never an athlete, but I got into bodybuilding like from a really young age, and I was never even like I wouldn't have called myself a bodybuilder, but I was just very interested in the applied science of bodybuilding.
Cool.
Yeah.
So neat.
Yep.
Yeah. So that literature goes back, that long. The cognitive research is more recent. And so there's been cognitive research. There's also been research, particularly with aging. So I think, naturally, if something's going to help you build and maintain muscle, then like scientists start thinking, could this help with aging? Because sarcopenia is this whole major issue we described where you have this anabolic resistance and you start losing muscle as you age. So they start studying in older populations and they look at, can it improve bone density? Can it improve cognition? I think the quick summary of the bone density is that there's not much there actually, surprisingly, because I think what we thought was, or researchers thought was, well, if you're helping build this muscle, then it's got to help improve bone density as well. And there's not much there as of yet. In terms of cognition, there is some there. It's with much higher doses though. So the typical doses that I think most people are familiar with creatine are about 5 grams. If you're a larger male, it could be more like 10 grams, but that's typically the dose that you would take every day sustainably in order
10 grams.
5 to 10 grams. Yeah. I think 5 grams is like there's a specific calculation based off your weight. I'm forgetting it right now, but if you're closer to if you're over 200 pounds, you could probably do about 10 grams. If you're 100 pounds, it's probably more like 3. I think the 5 grams is closer to around like 150 pounds. But you won't hurt yourself taking 5 if you weigh 100 pounds, and you won't hurt yourself taking 10 grams if you're 150 pounds. It's a very safe product. But yeah, you'll get more benefit at slightly higher dosages. We can follow up afterwards. I can make sure you have that for your show notes, like what's the exact formula for your weight.
Well, I've heard that before though,
yeah.
like 3 to 5 grams for general maintenance dosing. But then there was a study that came out recently that made waves within our community that found that I think the dose was 10 grams of creatine was able to offset some of the cognitive deficits that occur with sleep deprivation.
Yes. So that's one of the things I was going to get to, is that really the cognitive benefits, more of it has been studied even higher, like at these 20-gram doses. But there was one study that at the 10-gram dose, that basically if you had a poor night of sleep and then you took this higher dose of creatine, you perform slightly better on these cognitive tests. So most of the research has shown that it's kind of confusing. I think you have to really understand how they do all this cognitive research, but basically memory shows some improvement and focus shows some improvement. But when they look at total executive functioning and like kind of total cognitive functioning, there's not that much of an improvement. It's really primarily in memory and in focus. There was that sleep study though, basically that was like, if you didn't sleep well, it could improve. And I would say that is where more of the research has shown itself to be valuable. It's not like if you have very healthy cognition, it's unlikely that you'll get significant benefits from these higher doses of 10 to 20 grams of creatine. It's specifically if you're under stress. So if you didn't sleep well, if you're undergoing other types of specific stress to like a stage of life, and they've looked at it particularly with people aging. There's not really clear research for people struggling actually with dementia or with Alzheimer's, but other types of cognitive impairment from aging, these higher doses of like 20 grams have improved memory.
Yeah, I continued to take creatine through the recovery process for my surgery, my back surgery. Even though I wasn't working out at the time, I knew that I probably wasn't taking a high enough dose, but I kept on with my 5 gram per day maintenance dose, just with the thinking that, I mean, if it's a mitochondrial support, if it helps to support energy production during times of stress for the body, well, there's nothing as stressful as like a surgery.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great thought.
Yeah.
And I would say, so both during the time of that recovery period to support overall cognition, recovery from sleep, but also the body, it's going to be important, but also for when you get back to training, because it does actually have to be saturated. Creatine's not the thing that's like you just take on the days when you work out. You need to take it consistently. The other thing I'd name for you too is like, because you are a big red meat eater, that 5 gram dose, if like your primary source of protein is red meat, you're probably good. Yeah. Whereas if you're like a vegan, like I would be going to the much higher doses because you're simply not getting creatine in your diet.
In your diet. Yeah. Creatine's a carnonutrient. It's found exclusively in red meat, animal source foods, red meat and fish specifically. So you kind of already alluded to this, but is there value in cycling creatine on and off, or do you think it's something that should be taken consistently every day?
Just taken consistently every day. I think if you cycle off it for a certain period of time, you're not going to there's not going to be some big negative impact, right? So for example, sometimes when I go on vacation, simply because I like to not take things all the time, I just won't bring it and I just won't take it, right? But I don't think that there's this like explicit, clear, scientific based positive reason for why I would stop taking it for a week.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Kion is that it's gender neutral. Because sometimes you see these brands that are, what is it called? Pink washing or, where they'll market like creatine specifically for women, like a creatine product specifically for women, which to me is total nonsense. I mean, women should take creatine, but there's no difference in a creatine product that should be like specifically designed for women. Like creatine is creatine. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say fundamentally creatine monohydrate is the most proven form of creatine, and it doesn't, there's no difference in what you would give to a male or a female. That said, it's like if a business is based around, marketing to a specific gender and telling stories in a certain type of way, and that's the way they want to do it. I mean, I get it.
Yeah. Well,
but there's nothing different. There's nothing different in like the women's brand of creatine. It's going to be the exact same thing.
What about concerns that women have that creatine is going to bulk them up? There's a billboard that I've seen driving around LA. It's a certain brand. I'm not going to name the brand. I'm not going to call them out. But it says creatine gummies that bulk, with the word bulk crossed out, and then it says tone right next to it. As if like creatine typically, or from other brands, might be responsible for a bulking effect.
Yeah. So again,
is that just marketing?
Yeah, it's just marketing. The creatine that's going to be in that product versus any other product is going to be if it's creatine monohydrate, it's the same thing. And the way that it works is the way that I described earlier. Basically, it's putting this energy in your cells, this latent energy that enables you to do more exercise.
And if it doesn't do that, then it's either not creatine or it's not going to work.
Yeah. And I think that the idea of, I think more, again, it's just marketing, right? It's like there's this inclination typically for younger men who are maybe smaller, who want to get bigger, to want to bulk, right? So creatine gets marketed and positioned to them to try to convince them it's going to do that. That bulk is largely actually going to come from them eating a lot more calories and lifting a lot more really heavy things, and specific ways that they embrace progressive overload with their training protocol. Like that's how they're going to get really big. And it's going to be based off their hormones too, right? Like if they have a bunch more testosterone, like that's what's going to make them bulk.
Yeah.
If you want to get tone, well then you would not try to overeat the amount of calories that you're eating. You would, and focus probably on like different types of exercises in order to get a more tone physique. The creatine itself is not going to be responsible for that specifically.
And tone just means lean. Like
tone just means lean. Tone just means that you have muscular definition, right? So basically it means that you're building muscle and you're doing it, in a way relative to calories that is more neutral.
What about concerns that some women have that creatine is going to make you look bloated? Because creatine does draw water into it. Does increase the storage of water, but only in certain compartments, right? Like it's not leading to water storage underneath the skin. Yeah,
I think this has actually been a big reason that has probably scared women away from taking creatine, is this idea of bloating, because it's like this idea out there. So the way that it works is that when creatine gets stored in your muscle, it gets stored with water molecules. So yes, when you initially start taking creatine, a bit more water will actually get stored in the site of the muscle itself. It's not going to make you like bloated in your face or your stomach or your belly or legs or something like that. It's literally just going to mean that at the site of the bicep itself, with that creatine, there'll be a little bit more water. So if you did a DEXA scan or an in-body scan or something like that, you might see the water levels go up just a little bit. But actually longer term, there's actually very little, there's conflicting evidence actually of like any absolute increase in water retention.
Oh, interesting.
Over long-term use.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. But it's not like consuming like a really salty meal. Like it's not, the water is not being stored around the muscles. It's being stored directly inside the muscles.
Directly inside of the muscle. Yeah.
So if anything, it's going to make you look better.
It's going to potentially make you look a bit more toned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the opposite.
Yeah. I love it. There's so many misconceptions out there about like supplements, and like one of the more interesting questions that I get is actually from women who will hear me make a recommendation for like a protein powder or a creatine. And the question that I'll get is like, well, what protein powder do you recommend for women? Or what essential amino acid supplement do you recommend for women? Or what creatine do you recommend for women? And I'm always very perplexed. Like, where did this idea come from that women need a specific formulation as compared to men? I mean, maybe the dose differs, so maybe the serving size is going to differ. Gender to gender.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is the potential that with different types of categories of products and different types of functions within the body, that a female body could potentially react differently to something. But in this case, in the case of creatine, protein powder, and essential amino acids, that is not the case.
Yeah.
Like basically it has, you don't need a different type of formulation for those products. The dose though would be different. But again, the issue of the dose is actually, it's not about gender, it's about your body weight. That's really fundamentally what it is. And typically women weigh less than men, and thus they could benefit from a smaller dose.
Interesting. Very interesting, Angelo Keely. I polled my incredible audience for questions regarding protein and creatine, and they had lots. So I'm going to throw a few out at you if that's okay.
I'll do my best.
Yeah.
If I don't know, I'll admit it.
Okay. This is a good one from George of the Jungle. Asked, I've always questioned the timing of creatine. When's the best time to take it?
It doesn't matter. What matters is that you take it every single day. So if you go out and you try to look at the studies, there will be a different study that says a different thing in many different cases. But the general consensus of the research community of people who full-time study creatine, they would say that the most important thing is that you simply take it every day.
Every day.
So don't worry about it. I take it first thing in the morning because it's the easiest. It doesn't taste like anything.
No.
You put a scoop in some water. I take that with, essential aminos every day, and I'm done.
Can it be taken on an empty stomach?
Creatine?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I don't find it irritating to my stomach at all.
Love that.
If you do, then take it with food. There's nothing wrong with taking it with food.
Here's an interesting question. And actually, this is not the first time I've heard this, but Lisa Bot 11 asked, "Why does creatine give me insomnia, and what can I do about it? Is there any evidence that creatine is stimulatory, that it might lead to insomnia?"
I am not familiar with research that would show that. I am familiar that creatine actually doesn't work for some people. Like some people, like it simply doesn't give the response. Their muscle cells don't absorb it in the way that it does for others. But I'm not familiar with any specific research of it creating insomnia.
Yeah, neither am I.
I'm curious though. Now it makes me want to research that one more specifically.
Yeah.
If anything, it's tied. There's indications it can improve sleep quality.
Yeah, and so we have already talked about the cognitive aspects of it. I would assume that it would help with sleep. What about the connection between creatine and hair loss? Have you heard about that? There's some concern.
There's no there. That's been debunked for like, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years.
It has, right?
Yeah.
Very interesting, yeah. Because that would suck. Can creatine, Ingrid RP378 asked, can I add creatine to hot beverages?
Yeah.
You can?
Yep.
Great. Creatine. See, somebody asked, what is the best for women? It's very interesting. We're just going to say Kion. Kion's the best for women.
Yeah, there you go. Kion's the best. I mean, really, just look for creatine monohydrate. So that's the answer, but it's also the answer for men.
That is.
Yeah.
What about when it comes to creatine sourcing? Is there any concern about where the creatine comes from?
Yeah, and so this is what has led to the creation, basically, of a primary German-based creatine producer, and that brand is called Creapure. That is what, at my company, Kion, we choose to source from. And there are certain quality standards and ease in like getting your certificates of analysis, et cetera, from working with a partner like that in Germany. All of the other sourcing comes from China. And that sourcing is just it's a bit more complicated. I don't want to say that like, I haven't looked at every single creatine monohydrate source that's come out of China. But what I would say is when we compared and we made a decision about what we were going to put in our product, we looked at everything from the quality records, the C of A's, to also things like how easily it dissolved. And that German Creapure based product is significantly more dissolvable as well. So, we've stuck with it and it's been hard to stick with. During COVID years, there was serious supply chain issues. It wasn't the easiest thing to be like, no, we're only going to use this, basically the only German supplier of it.
I'd much rather take creatine from Germany than China.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Creapure. I've always heard that Creapure is the best, that you want to look out for Creapure. Phoenix.focused asks, can you take, this is an interesting question actually, because I think I know the answer, but I was confused about this for a period. Can you take creatine while trying to lose fat?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that creatine while trying to lose fat, it would help you in terms of if you're taking creatine when you're trying to lose fat, what's going to happen is, what I would say is if you're trying to lose fat, the primary methods you would use would be resistance training, likely some kind of walking to burn some additional calories, or NEAT type activities, not trying to like run too much or else you're going to get really hungry. So it's like, how do I kind of burn calories through walking and NEAT type activities? And then how do I stimulate protein synthesis to build more muscle? And then I'm going to try to eat enough protein, essential amino acids to overcome the fact that if I'm in a caloric deprivation, so that's the last thing, and then eat less calories, right? Yeah. Well, you need to overeat protein, make essential amino acids or protein that much more of your diet. The only thing that creatine is going to do in that whole formula is make it easier to do resistance training.
Yeah,
it's going to make it to where you can lift more weights.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's only a net positive.
The way that I think about it, and this is a really simplified way, but I think it's incredibly helpful. At least it has been for me in the past when I've gone through, when I've undergone cutting phases, is the same strategies that are going to help you build to maximize muscle protein synthesis in a calorie surplus are going to help you better maintain that muscle when you're in a calorie deficit. So creatine is going to help you build muscle, and it's going to help you hold on to that muscle when you're in a calorie deficit.
Yes.
I can't tell you.
And I guess I would say, help me hold on to the muscle. It's going to help me to continue to train and to train harder.
Yeah.
That's what it's going to do. And thus through that, yeah. But the way I'm really going to hold on to the muscle is through a surplus of essential amino acids. That's the way that I hold on to the muscle. I have to consume even more protein or even more essential amino acids than I would have if I was in a bulk.
Yeah. While resistance training.
Yeah.
You've already kind of touched on this, but Natalie Johnson Health asked, should I take creatine on off days or just on lifting days? I think we've already established you want to take it every day. Yeah.
Every day. It's not like a only exercise day, which I was thinking about the other question that suggests that creatine created insomnia. I'm curious if that person was taking a supplement that was more like a pre-workout.
Maybe
that was high, and they thought they were just taking creatine, but they were taking caffeine and taurine and a bunch of other stuff like that. Then I'm like, yeah, that's why you have insomnia.
That could be it. I can't tell you. I mean, I literally can't count how many questions like best creatine for a 46-year-old female. Like, I don't know where the pink washing. It's like the industry. The industry's created this paranoia for women. I feel so bad about it. But yeah, creatine monohydrate is creatine monohydrate, and you want to look out for Creapure. And Kion is what I take. Still beneficial if you're not lifting. Yes. What happens if you miss a day of creatine? No big deal, right?
No big deal. I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, as long as you're taking it consistently, like one day off, it's not a big deal.
So from my high school senior thesis, at least this was the case back then, the thinking was that you could either load creatine. Like if you're naive to taking creatine and you want to begin taking it, you could either load it with 25 grams a day for 5 days and then transition over to a maintenance dose of 5 grams a day. Or if you don't want to do the loading phase, which I understand is a lot of creatine to take every day, you could essentially just take the maintenance phase of 5 grams a day, and it'll take about, I think the data suggested something like pretty close to a month, like 28 days to saturate the muscles with a maintenance dose.
I think that's pretty accurate. It's like if you take a bunch more up front, it'll saturate more quickly, where you can just take a little bit longer to get there.
Yeah.
And again, my general sense would be like, to have lasting change in my life, it's like keep things simple. Like rather than trying to like get this really quick result like right away, it's like just add creatine to the daily thing and take a scoop and just keep doing it, move on. And like, you're going to see the benefits in a month, 2 months, 3 months, like you're going to see it.
Yeah. And I guess the reason why I brought that up is because logic would dictate that if it takes 28 days of a maintenance dose to saturate the muscles, then missing a day or two here and there, like it would probably take 28 days to fully deplete your muscles of creatine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact data on how quickly it depletes, but I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Ellen Jones asks, can I continue to take it rectally? That's got to be a joke. Do you know anybody who's taking creatine rectally?
I don't. I haven't heard of that one.
Is that a thing? No?
I've not heard of that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's commitment right there. Well, there's a lot of creatine gummies on the market. I know Kion doesn't, I take Kion powder. I think, you're not ingesting any extraneous calories when you take it in powder form, but gummies versus powder, any concerns? I mean, they are on the market. They are heavily marketed these days. I
don't have any concerns about gummies in terms of like how effective it is. It seems funny to me. That's the only thing. When I think about it, like to create a gummy, you basically can have about like 20% of active ingredients in the gummy. And the rest of it needs to be like other stuff, like either gelatin or pectin or all these other things. So you're taking a lot of other stuff to get that 20% of actives. When you're taking something like melatonin and it's like 3 milligrams, it's like one gummy, and it's barely anything in it, and it's just one gummy. If creatine, like that's a lot of gummies that you're having to eat, and it's for something that doesn't even taste like anything. Like creatine is totally, particularly Creapure, or Kion creatine, it's completely tasteless. You just put a scoop in water and drink it. Like I'd just be done with it.
Yeah.
Like the complication of having to eat all of these gummies, it seems weird. I've been surprised that it's been such a big thing. Well, maybe maybe all these companies are better marketers than we are.
Maybe you're just old fashioned.
Yeah.
No, I've tried some of them. They're not bad, but it's like you're ingesting typically like calories that you don't necessarily. So if you're fat loss, if you're in sort of a fat loss phase, like it's way more efficient to just take the powder. I've gotten this question a few times. I don't know if you're not a prenatal nutritionist, but like creatine while pregnant. A few people have asked about that.
I mean, that is one I would direct you to talk to your doctor directly about. It's interesting. I'm not as Typically, supplements are something that most scientists don't want to test on pregnant women unless there's going to be huge upside to it, right? Because naturally, like the risk of injuring that baby or the mother, like it's something that they really try to avoid. What I would say, though, is that there's a very interesting article that came out last year that was a good meta-analysis of actually the positive impacts of creatine on women specifically for reproductive health. So it wasn't relative to being pregnant, but it was specific to reproductive health. And I had a whole list of benefits. I can't remember exactly what they are right now, but that actually has been studied.
Yeah. It's definitely if you have a medical condition or if you're, it's definitely something that you want to check with your healthcare practitioner. But again, just to underscore, creatine's been studied it's got decades of literature backing its safety, its efficacy. But most of these studies, I would assume, are in either premenopausal, non-pregnant women or men, like dudes.
There's also quite a bit in postmenopausal women, creatine specifically.
Yeah?
Uh-huh.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, they probably do a lot of that research in postmenopausal women to contrul for the
Sarcopenia.
Or the monthly cycle,
for,
because it's like, this is an interesting question. What's the difference between creatine and protein? I mean, there's a big difference.
Yeah, but
creatine's made up of amino acids, right?
Creatine is technically is one amino acid. It's a good question. What it shows me is just like normal consumers out there getting marketed all these things. Like what should I take? Like what actually matters, right? So what I would say is creatine is fundamentally different from protein. So the role of protein, and let's just say like protein powder or even like essential amino acids, what it does is it actually stimulates the protein synthesis in the body. We're made up of proteins. Like literally our body is made up of proteins. Our skin, our hair, our nails, our muscle, hormones, enzymes are made up of all these proteins. And when we consume essential amino acids as a free-form supplement or as a protein powder or a steak, and that goes into the blood, that then builds the new proteins in our body. So that's what protein is. Creatine is this one very specific type of non-dietary amino acid. It's basically not an amino acid that goes into building us. Technically it's an amino acid because it has nitrogen component to it, but it's really fundamentally this thing, as I described earlier, it's basically like this energy source. It gets stored in your muscle and gets used to get converted into ATP in this very immediate, quick fashion. So it's pretty fundamentally different, for our purposes as humans, right?
Yeah.
Maybe technically they're both aminos, but they're not, the way that they function in our body are fundamentally different.
Yeah. Well, I use creatine every day. It's one of my staple supplements. I also love your guys' protein powder. It's whey protein, which we know minimizes risk of exposure to heavy metals and stuff like that you often see, in the protein powder space. And yeah, your essential amino acids make it super easy to hit that leucine threshold without ingesting, a whole lot of additional calories that you might ingest from whey protein. It's just like you've got all these options for consumers. I think it's really great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's the hope, man. Yeah, I feel like, a whey protein isolate and an amino supplement are they're two different tools to accomplish the same thing. And it's like, if you want to make this kind of rich smoothie, then it's like protein powder is awesome. And if you want to feel more full, it's interesting. Whey protein actually is like been famous for like slowing gastric emptying, which is why people take like GLP-1s, right? It like slows down your digestion and helps you feel full longer, right? So if you want to feel really full, a whey protein powder is awesome. If on the other hand, like you don't want to feel really full and you just want to get the greatest kind of impact, like super concentrated whey protein powder, that's what an amino supplement can do. So they're both great. They're just different.
Yeah. And what's I know, you've been on the podcast a bunch of times in the past, but like, what is your why? Like what motivates you, at the helm of this company, advocating for greater awareness around, protein, essential amino, these supplements that are designed to optimize human health, but like what excites you about what it is that you do?
You know, like a lot of things excite me in life. You know, I think, but when it comes down to like what I care most about, it's mostly like what's going on in my mind. Like, what's my thinking? You know, can I think better? Can I be healthier with my thoughts, with my communication? And then the other main thing is like, what am I eating? How's my body feeling? And how can I be healthier with other people in the world, right? Like, how can I just have like a healthier life, right? And so when it comes then to like needing to make a living, which is like a real thing, right? Like being productive in society, contributing to just the social order in general, right? It's like, I want to be in one of those spaces, right? I either want to be helping people to think clearer, better, make more thoughtful decisions, or I want to be making some kind of product that is like literally going to make them healthier. That's going to help them live longer, live healthier, live a more vibrant life. And so in those terms, it's like, I think I found myself, and I can't remember if I talked about this previously, but like my family was really into natural health as a kid. My dad was actually like an importer of supplements. Like I just grew up kind of in that space. So I'm sure that has something to do with it. But yeah, I really believe that if people take additional protein powder, take essential amino acids, take creatine, they will be healthier. They will live longer. They will be stronger. They will be fitter. They'll get to, live a better life. And so if I'm going to spend my time on anything every day, like what else would I spend my time on? And I guess, I ended up having my own company in this way because I want to have really healthy relationships. And by creating, your own company, you get to set the tone and set the terms of what those relational compacts are. How are you agreeing to like work together, be together every day, and like what do healthy relationships look like? And so, just trying to live a really good life, man. I guess that's my why.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you're helping people get wealthier because health is a form of wealth. We learned that recently with Sahil Bloom, who was on the show talking about the 5 different kinds of wealth. And yeah, health is if you don't have that, I mean, you don't have much of anything if you don't have your health. And so I applaud what you guys are doing. I know that you guys, have invested a lot into rigorous product testing, transparency, everything's super laid out, well laid out and, made super clear for consumers. And yeah, that's why I'm super happy to work with you guys. So thanks for coming out. I know that listeners can head over to getkion.com/geniuslife to save 20% off, which is super generous of you guys. So thanks for offering that. Where else can people, if they have follow-up questions, they want to connect with you? Are you on social media?
Yeah, I'm not a super public persona type guy. I'm like just into really, building Kion. But if you really want to find me, you can find me. And I'll answer any DMs. I love helping people. You can also, another really cool thing about Kion is we have like live phone support staff in our office in Boulder. So you can just call us and just talk to someone like with any questions that you have. And if they'll tell you what they know and what they don't know. If they don't know information, look into it more, find a good study for you. So you just...
Doesn't get routed to some call center in India?
No.
Great.
Just call us.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, getkion.com/geniuslife again for 20% off. Thank you, Angelo Keely, for coming out and educating us all. Super appreciated.
Thank you, Max. It's an honor to be here, man. You're doing a good service with this podcast.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening. Hope we answered many of your questions. You guys were super great in terms of throwing questions my way on Instagram. So thank you for that. And I will catch you on the next episode. Peace, everybody. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.